"You came back for me?" she gasped. Mafia boss waited years for the girl who once broke his heart. The rain in Raven Harbor had a specific smell to it. It was a scent composed of cold salt water, rusting steel from the shipyards, and the exhaust of 1,000 cars idling in traffic. For Emma Lane, it was the smell of a memory she had spent the last 5 years trying to scrub from her skin. She stood at the bottom of a 4-story walk-up on the east side of the city, the handle of her battered suitcase digging into her palm. The building was gray and peeling, a far cry from the places she had lived during her time away, but it was all she could afford now. She took a deep breath, inhaling the damp air, and began the climb. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of the luggage, but because of the weight of her return. She had sworn she would never come back to this city. She had promised herself that, when she left, she was leaving for good, severing the ties that bound her to a past filled with dangerous boys and broken promises. But life had a way of laughing at promises. Her father, Daniel Lane, was waiting inside apartment 4B. When Emma unlocked the door, the sound of his coughing greeted her before she even stepped across the threshold. The apartment was small, cramped with furniture that had seen better decades, and the air was thick with the smell of old medicine and dust. "Dad," Emma said softly, dropping her suitcase by the door. Daniel looked up from the recliner. He looked 20 years older than he was. His skin was gray, hanging loosely on his frame, and his eyes were dull with pain. He tried to smile, but it turned into a grimace. "Emma," he wheezed, "you didn't have to come." "I did," she said, walking over to kneel beside him. She took his hand, noting how cold his fingers were. "I told you I would be here. We are going to figure this out." On the kitchen table sat a stack of envelopes that Emma knew all too well. They were medical bills, final notices, and threats from debt collectors. Daniel had worked hard his whole life, but the sickness had drained everything he had saved. The numbers were terrifying. Tens of thousands of dollars in hospital fees, specialist visits, and medications that barely seemed to work. Emma stared at the pile, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. She needed money. She needed it fast, and she needed to stay invisible while she earned it. The last thing she wanted was for anyone from her old life to know she was back. Specifically, she needed to ensure that one person never found out she had returned to the city he now ruled. "I got a job," she lied, smoothing the blanket over her father's knees. "It starts tomorrow. Everything is going to be fine." It did not take long for Emma to realize that remaining invisible in Raven Harbor was harder than she thought. She found work at the Harbor Diner, a greasy spoon located near the docks that served burnt coffee and eggs to longshoremen and shift workers. It was the kind of place where people kept their heads down, which suited her perfectly. For 2 weeks, Emma worked double shifts. She arrived before the sun came up and left long after it went down. Her feet ached constantly, and her uniform smelled permanently of frying oil. But the cash tips were decent, and every dollar went straight into the jar she kept hidden in the back of the freezer at home. The other waitresses were curious, though in a town like this, a pretty face returning after years away was news. "So why did you leave in the first place?" asked Sarah, a waitress with teased hair and too much blue eyeshadow, as they refilled salt shakers during a lull. "You just vanished after high school. People talked, you know." Emma kept her eyes on the stainless steel cap she was twisting. "I just needed a change." Sarah leaned against the counter, chewing gum loudly. "A change. Right. Must have been some change to keep you away while your dad got sick. Did you have a guy out there? Or were you running from one here?" Emma froze for a fraction of a second. The image of dark eyes and a sharp jawline flashed in her mind. Unbidden and painful, she forced her hands to keep moving. "I was not running from anyone," Emma said, her voice tight. "I just wanted a different life." She could feel Sarah watching her, skeptical and bored, but a customer waved for a refill, and the moment passed. Emma let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. She was walking a tightrope. Every day she spent in this city was a risk. She told herself that if she just kept her head down, worked her shifts, and paid off her father's debts. She could disappear again before the ghosts of her past caught up to her. Across town, the atmosphere was entirely different. The Onyx Club was the crown jewel of the Moretti organization's legitimate businesses. It was a place of dark velvet, expensive crystal, and shadows that cost $1,000 a bottle to sit in. In the back office, soundproofed against the thumping bass of the music on the floor, Luca Moretti sat behind a mahogany desk that looked more like a fortress than furniture. Luca had changed in the years since Emma had seen him last. The boyish recklessness was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying stillness. He wore a tailored suit that cost more than Emma made in a year, the fabric cut to hide the holster beneath his left arm. There were scars on his knuckles, small white lines that told stories of violence, and his eyes were dark, devoid of the warmth they had once held only for her. He was listening to a report from his capo, a man named Marco who looked like he had been carved out of granite. "The Castellano crew is pushing on the South Territory," Marco said, his voice a low rumble. "They hit one of our collection trucks this morning, took the cash, beat the driver within an inch of his life. It is a message. Luca." Luca did not blink. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching the light catch the crystal. "They are desperate," Luca said, his voice smooth and deadly quiet. "Manuel Castellano is losing his grip on the ports. He's lashing out. We need to hit back," Marco insisted. Hard. "We will," Luca replied, "but not emotionally. We wait until they overextend, then we take everything." He took a sip of his drink, his gaze shifting to the stack of paperwork on his desk. It was routine maintenance, payroll approvals for the various businesses the family owned to wash their money, restaurants, laundromats, shipping companies, and diners. He picked up a sheet from the harbor diner, scanning the list of names with half interest, his mind already calculating the logistics of the retaliation against the Castellanos. Then he stopped, his eyes fixed on a single line halfway down the page. The glass in his hand creaked as his grip tightened instantly, the knuckles turning white. The liquid inside rippled from the tremor in his hand. Emma Lane. The name hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The air left his lungs. For a moment, the office, the club, and the war with the Castellanos ceased to exist. All he could see was that name. The name of the girl who had looked him in the eye 5 years ago, told him she loved him, and then vanished into the night, leaving him standing in the rain with a ring in his pocket and a hole in his chest that had never closed. Marco noticed the shift. "Luca? What is it?" Luca stared at the paper for another 5 seconds, forcing his heart to resume its rhythm. He slowly set the glass down, fearing he would crush it if he held it any longer. When he looked up, his face was a mask of indifference, but his eyes were burning with a blue fire. "This payroll record," Luca said, his voice tight. "It is current?" Marco glanced at the sheet. "Yeah, from this week. Why?" Luca stood up. The movement was abrupt, violent in its suddenness. He buttoned his jacket, his jaw set in a line of granite. "Verify it," he ordered. "Find out if that is a mistake or if that person is actually working there." Marco looked confused. "A waitress?" "Luca, we have a war starting with the Castellanos. Why do you care about a—" "Just do it," Luca snapped, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the dangerous rage beneath. "Confirm it. Now." He turned and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked streets of the city he owned. If she was back, if she was really here, in his city, working for him without even knowing it, he did not know if he wanted to kiss her or destroy her. But he knew one thing for certain. He was going to find her. The rain was coming down harder by the time Emma finished her shift that night. The diner was empty, the neon sign buzzing angrily against the silence. She wiped down the counters for the 3rd time, her movements mechanical. It was nearly 2 a.m. Her coworkers had left an hour ago, leaving her to close up. It was a task she usually didn't mind. The solitude gave her time to think. But tonight, the solitude felt heavy, oppressive. She paused, rag in hand, looking out the plate glass window. The street was dark, save for the flickering street lamp on the corner. The rain streaked the glass. distorting the world outside into smears of gray and yellow. She felt a shiver run down her spine, the fine hairs on the back of her neck standing up. It was that old feeling again. Paranoia, the sense that she was being watched. She shook her head. "You are just tired," she told herself aloud. "Just tired and jumpy." She tossed the rag into the bin beneath the counter, grabbed her purse, and clocked out. She double-checked the back door, set the alarm, and pushed her way out the front entrance, locking the heavy glass door behind her. The cold air hit her face, wet and biting. She pulled her thin coat tighter around her body, turning to walk toward the bus stop. That was when she saw the car. It was parked directly at the curb, its engine idling so quietly it was almost silent. It was a sleek, black sedan, polished to a mirror shine despite the weather. It looked like a shark swimming in deep water. It was out of place in front of the rundown diner, a symbol of wealth and power that did not belong on this side of town. Emma stopped. Her breath hitched in her throat. The driver's side door opened. A leather shoe stepped onto the wet pavement, then a leg clad in dark wool, and then the man stood up. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. It was him. Luca Moretti stood under the flickering streetlight, the rain beating on the shoulders of his suit. He did not have an umbrella. He did not seem to care. He simply stood there, staring at her across the 10 feet of sidewalk that separated them. He looked older. The years had stripped away the softness of his youth, leaving behind hard angles and a jagged intensity. His hair was shorter, styled with precision. There was a scar near his left eye that she did not recognize, and another one visible on the back of his hand as he adjusted his cuff. But it was his eyes that terrified her. They were darker than she remembered, bottomless and cold. "Luca," she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a prayer or a curse. "Hello? Emma," he said. His voice was deeper, rougher, like gravel moving under a tide. It sent a shockwave through her body that made her knees weak. They stood in silence for a long moment, the rain falling between them. The air was thick with shock and the weight of 5 years of silence. "What are you doing here?" Emma asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. She crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive barrier against the force of his presence. "I own the building," Luca said simply. "I saw the payroll. I did not believe it was you." Emma swallowed hard. I didn't know. I just needed a job." "You needed a job," he repeated, testing the words. "So you came back to Raven Harbor, the one place you swore you would never set foot in again." "I have to go," Emma said, taking a step back. "I can't do this." "Luca." He moved then. It was a subtle shift, but it closed the distance between them. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough that she could smell him. Rain, expensive cologne, and something distinctly masculine that made her head spin. "Why did you leave?" he asked. The question was not a plea, it was a demand. Emma looked away, staring at the wet pavement. "You know why?" "No." "I do not," Luca said, his voice rising slightly, cracking the cool veneer. "One day we were planning a life. The next day you were gone. No note, no call, just an empty room. I had to," she said, her eyes filling with tears she refused to shed. "I had to save myself." "From me?" he asked, the hurt flashing across his face so quickly she almost missed it. "You thought I would hurt you? From your world." "Luca," she snapped, looking up at him. "Look at you! Look at this car! Look at the way you stand. You are the boss now, aren't you? That is what you always wanted. I couldn't be a part of that." He stared at her, his jaw working. "I would have burned it all down for you, if you had just asked." Emma shook her head. "No, you wouldn't have. It is who you are." She turned away, panic rising in her chest. She needed to get away. Being this close to him was suffocating. It brought back every feeling she had tried to bury, the love, the fear, the desperate need to be near him. "I want nothing from you. Luca," she said, her voice shaking. "Just let me go." She took 2 steps toward the bus stop. Suddenly, The roar of an engine tore through the quiet night. Emma turned her head. A gray sedan was speeding down the street, its headlights off. It swerved toward the curb where they were standing. Luca reacted before Emma could even process what was happening. "Down!" he roared. He lunged at her, his arm sweeping around her waist. He yanked her backward, spinning her around and shoving her hard against the brick wall of the diner. The air exploded with noise. Pop, 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 pop. Gunfire erupted from the speeding car, the muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Bullets slammed into the parked cars nearby, shattering glass and punching holes in metal. A side mirror on Luca's car exploded, sending shards skittering across the pavement. Emma screamed, but the sound was buried in Luca's chest. He had pinned her against the wall, his massive frame completely covering hers. He was a human shield, his back to the shooters, his head tucked down next to hers. She felt the impact of his body slamming into hers, heavy and solid. She felt his heart pounding against her shoulder, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. His breath was hot on her ear, coming in sharp, angry gasps. "Stay down," he growled, his voice vibrating through her chest. "Do not move." The car screeched tires and sped away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. Silence rushed back in, ringing in Emma's ears. She was shaking violently, her hands clutching the lapels of his suit jacket without meaning to. The fabric was wet and smooth under her fingers. She could smell the gunpowder now, acrid and sharp, mixing with the rain. Luca did not move immediately. He stayed pressed against her, his body tense as wire, waiting to see if the car would return. Emma was trapped between the cold brick and the overwhelming heat of him. For a second, just a second, she felt safe. It was a terrifying contradiction. The man she had run from to save her life was now the only thing keeping her alive. "Are you hit?" he asked, pulling back slightly to look at her face. His hands gripped her upper arms, his fingers digging in with bruising force. "Emma, look at me. Are you hit?" "No," she gasped, her eyes wide and terrified. "No, I don't think so." He scanned her quickly, his eyes frantic, checking for blood. When he found none, the relief on his face was instantly replaced by a cold, deadly fury. He looked over his shoulder at the destruction on the street, then back at her. "They were aiming for me," he muttered, a curse word slipping out under his breath in the distance. The wail of police sirens began to rise, getting louder with every second. Luca released her arms and grabbed her hand instead. "We have to go." "What? No," Emma protested, trying to pull her hand back. "The police are coming. I have to stay. I have to tell them." "You cannot tell them anything," Luca snapped, pulling her toward his car. "You were seen with me. That makes you a target now. If the Castellanos know you are with me, they will come back. And next time they won't miss." He opened the passenger door of his car, the interior light flooding the wet pavement. "Get in. I can't go with you," Emma cried, panic seizing her again. "My father—" "I will have my men check on your father," Luca said, his voice brokering no argument. "But right now, you are getting in this car. I am not asking you. Emma, get in." She looked at him. His face was hard, dangerous, and terrifying. But in his eyes, she saw the same desperation she felt. He was terrified for her. The sirens were close now, blue lights flashing against the buildings down the block. Emma made a choice. She ducked her head and slid into the leather seat of the expensive car. Luca slammed the door shut, rounded the hood in 3 long strides, and slid into the driver's seat. He keyed the ignition, the powerful engine roaring to life, as he peeled away from the curb, leaving the shattered glass and the wailing sirens behind. Emma sat frozen, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked over at him. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. She remembered those hands. She remembered how gentle they used to be when they tangled in her hair, how warm they were when they held hers while walking home from school. Now, they were weapons. They were steering her back into the very darkness she had spent 5 years running from. And God help her. She did not know if she wanted to jump out of the moving car or slide across the seat and bury her face in his neck. "Where are we going?" she whispered, staring out the window as the city blurred past. "Somewhere safe," Luca said, his eyes fixed on the road. Just for tonight. Emma closed her eyes, leaning her head against the cool glass. She had come back to save her father. She had come back to be invisible. Instead, she was sitting in the passenger seat of the most dangerous man in the city, driving straight back into the heart of the storm. She had survived leaving him once. She wasn't sure she would survive it again. The elevator ride to the top of the Moretti Tower was silent, a vertical ascent that felt more like being sealed into a pressurized chamber than returning home. When the steel doors slid open with a soft hiss, Emma Lane stepped out into a space that was less a home and more a declaration of conquest. Luca Moretti's penthouse was a sprawling expanse of black marble, chrome, and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of Raven Harbor. The city lights glittered below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Cold and distant, the furniture was sparse and modern. Sharp angles of Italian leather that looked like they had never been sat on. On the far wall, a massive abstract painting in shades of charcoal and blood red dominated the room. It was breathtaking, it was expensive, and to Emma, it felt exactly like a cage. Just for tonight, Luca said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, open space. He walked past her, tossing his keys onto a glass console table. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot. Until I know who ordered that shooting and why they did it in front of you, you are not going anywhere else. Emma stood near the entrance, hugging her coat around her body. The air in the penthouse was climate-controlled to a perfect, sterile cool. It lacked the drafty warmth of her father's apartment or the smell of old paper and coffee that clung to her life now. This place smelled of nothing, just purified air and money. This is a mistake, Emma said, watching him loosen his tie. He pulled the strip of silk from his collar with a fluid motion that made her stomach tighten. I can't stay here. Luca, my life is down there. My father needs me. Your father is safe, Luca replied, walking toward the kitchen. I told you. My men are watching the building. If anyone comes near him, they will be dealt with. He opened a hidden refrigerator panel and pulled out a bottle of water, setting it on the counter. He looked at her then. Really looked at her, stripping away the layers of defense she had built up over the last 5 years. You look exhausted. Emma, he said quietly. I am exhausted, she admitted, her shoulders slumping, but I can't rest. I have to call him. He will worry if I don't come home. Luca gestured toward the hallway. Use the landline in the study. It is encrypted. No one can trace the location. Emma walked down the long, shadowed hallway, feeling the plush runner swallow the sound of her footsteps. The study was dark, lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling. She sat behind the massive desk, feeling small and out of place, and dialed the familiar number. It rang 4 times before her father picked up, his voice raspy with sleep. Hello? Hey, Dad, Emma said, forcing a cheerfulness into her voice that she did not feel. It's me. Emma? Where are you? It is late. I know, I'm so sorry. I ran into an old friend from high school. Sarah. You remember Sarah? We got to talking, and it got so late that she insisted I stay at her place instead of walking home in the rain. There was a pause on the line, and Emma held her breath, hating the lie. She hated that returning to Raven Harbor meant returning to deception. Oh, Daniel said, sounding relieved. That is good, honey. I worry about you out there at night. The city isn't what it used to be. I know. Dad, I am safe. I promise. How are you feeling? I am fine, he said, though a cough interrupted him. Just the usual aches. Don't worry about me. Get some sleep. I love you, Dad. Love you too, kiddo. Emma hung up the phone and buried her face in her hands. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest. She was lying to protect him, but it didn't make her feel any better. She was sitting in the fortress of a crime lord while her father lay in a drafty apartment, drowning in debt she couldn't pay. She didn't know that Luca was standing just outside the door. He had not meant to eavesdrop, but he had needed to ensure the line was clear. He stood in the shadows of the hallway, leaning against the wall, listening to the tremor in her voice. He heard the love, the fear, and the desperate exhaustion. He also heard what she hadn't said. Luca walked silently back to the living room and pulled his own phone from his pocket. He dialed a number that he knew by heart. "It is me," Luca said when the line connected. "Boss, it is 3 a.m. Wake up," Luca ordered, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "I need you to make a transfer. Right now. I am listening. Daniel Lane, St. Jude's Hospital. Find every outstanding invoice under his name. Every surgery, every prescription, every therapy session. Okay." The voice on the other end said, the sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. "I am looking at the file now. It is significant, boss. We are talking close to $50,000 in arrears. Pay it," Luca said. "All of it, every cent, and clear the debt with the collection agency, too. I want his balance at 0 by sunrise." "Understood." "How do you want this flagged?" "Charitable donation, shell company, anonymous," Luca said, watching Emma emerge from the hallway, looking pale and fragile in the dim light. "Tell them it was an administrative error in their billing department. If he finds out it came from me, or from anyone connected to this life, you will be the one explaining it to me. Do you understand?" "Loud and clear." Luca ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket just as Emma entered the room. He kept his face impassive, masking the sudden surge of protective fury that roiled in his gut. He could not fix the past. He could not undo the night she left. But he had money, more money than God, and if he could use it to remove even 1 ounce of the weight crushing her shoulders, he would do it without blinking. "Everything okay?" he asked. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "He bought it. He thinks I am with a friend." Luca nodded once. "Good. There is a guest room down the hall. Second door on the right. There are fresh towels in the bathroom." "Thank you," she whispered. She moved to walk past him, the space in the hallway narrowing. They both hesitated. For a moment, they were standing mere inches apart. Emma looked up, and Luca looked down. The air between them crackled, charged with a static electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He could smell her, vanilla and rain, the same scent that had haunted his dreams for 5 years. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to run his thumb along the line of her jaw, to see if her skin was as soft as he remembered. His hand twitched at his side. Emma's eyes searched his, wide and conflicted. She looked like she wanted to run, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. "Luca," she started, her voice barely a breath. "Go to sleep." "Emma," he cut her off, his voice rougher than he intended, "before I change my mind about letting you sleep in the guest room." She flinched slightly, the spell breaking. She stepped around him quickly, the movement sharp and defensive, and disappeared down the hall. Luca stood alone in the dark, listening to the click of her door latching, a sound that felt final and heavy in the silence. Sleep did not come for either of them. The storm passed, leaving behind a city scrubbed clean and glistening. By late evening of the next day, the tension in the penthouse had thickened to a suffocating density. They moved around each other like ghosts, careful to avoid contact, careful to look anywhere but at each other. It happened in the kitchen first. Emma was reaching for a mug from the high cabinet, her shirt riding up slightly to reveal a strip of pale skin at her waist. Luca, entering to get water, instinctively reached out to help her. His hand covered hers on the handle of the ceramic mug. The contact was electric. Emma gasped, snatching her hand back as if she had been burned. The mug clattered onto the counter, spinning precariously before settling. "Sorry," she stammered, backing up until her hips hit the marble island. "I didn't hear you come in." Luca did not move. He stood there, his hand still hovering in the air where hers had been. His eyes tracked the rapid rise and fall of her chest. "You used to be able to hear me coming a mile away," he said softly. "I am not that girl anymore," Emma replied, her voice tight. "No," Luca agreed, his gaze darkening. "You are not. That girl would never have looked at me with fear in her eyes." He turned and walked away, leaving her trembling in the kitchen, the ghost of his touch burning on her skin. Later that night, the silence became unbearable. Emma found Luca on the balcony, leaning against the glass railing, staring out at the city grid below. The wind was high up here, whipping his dark hair across his forehead. He had shed his suit jacket. Standing in a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, a cigarette burning unsmoked in his fingers. Emma slid the glass door open. The rush of wind drowned out the city noise. "You should come inside," she said. "It is cold." Luca took a drag of the cigarette, the embers glowing bright orange against the darkness. He exhaled a plume of smoke that was instantly snatched away by the wind. "Why did you do it, Emma?" He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. The question had been hanging between them since the moment he stepped out of the car at the diner. "Luca, please," she said, stepping onto the balcony. "No," he said, turning to face her. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were raw. "No more running, no more lies. You owe me this. You left. Overnight, we were 18. I had a ring in my pocket. Emma, I was going to ask you to marry me, and I woke up to find your side of the bed cold and your closet empty. Why?" Emma gripped the railing, the wind tugging strands of hair across her face. She looked down at the streetlights far below, blurring through her tears. "Because I loved you," she whispered. "That is a lie," Luca snapped, stepping closer. "You do not leave people you love. You do not break them." "I didn't break you," Emma cried, her head snapping up. "I saved you. Look at who you were becoming. Luca, your father was dragging you into the business. He told me that if I stayed, he would use me to control you, that my safety would always be the leverage he needed to make you do the things you didn't want to do." Luca froze. "He told you that?" "He came to me the night before graduation," Emma said, the words spilling out now that the dam had broken. "He sat in my kitchen and told me that the only way you would ever be strong enough to lead was if you had nothing to lose. As long as I was there, you were weak, and if I stayed, he said he couldn't guarantee I would live to see 20. Emma's voice cracked. "So I left. I left so you wouldn't have to choose between me and your family. I left so you wouldn't have my blood on your hands." Luca stared at her, the cigarette burning down to his fingers. He dropped it, grinding it out with his heel without looking down. "My father is dead, Emma," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "But I am still here. And for 5 years, I thought you just stopped loving me. I thought you found someone better, someone safe. There has never been anyone else." Emma choked out. Luca closed the distance between them. The city lights reflected in his eyes, making them look like shattered glass. "I waited," he admitted, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I checked every bus manifest leaving Raven Harbor for 6 months. I paid private investigators in Chicago, New York, Seattle. I walked the streets of cities I didn't know, looking for your face in the crowd. I drove myself insane looking for you, and when I couldn't find you, I had to convince myself you didn't want to be found." Emma let out a sob, the sound torn from her throat. Hearing his pain, seeing the years of torment she had caused him, it was too much. "I'm sorry," she wept. "I'm so sorry. Luca, I thought you would move on. I thought you would forget me." "Forget you?" Luca laughed, a sound void of humor. "How was I supposed to forget the only person who ever saw me? Not the Moretti heir, not the boss, me." He reached for her then, but Emma panicked. The intensity of his emotion was a tidal wave, and she was drowning. She shoved his chest with both hands, a burst of desperate strength. "Don't eat," she cried. "Don't look at me like that." He didn't stumble. He barely moved. Instead, his hands shot up and caught her wrists. His grip was firm, inescapable, but gentle. He didn't push her away. He pulled her in. Emma struggled for a second, but it was futile against his strength. She looked up at him, breathing quick and uneven breaths, her chest heaving against his. "Let me go," she whispered, though the fight was draining out of her. "Never." Luca answered, "Not again." He loosened his grip on her wrists, his hands sliding up her arms, over her shoulders, until they cradled her face. His thumbs brushed away the tears tracking down her cheeks. The anger was melting away, replaced by a hunger that terrified her more than his rage ever could. Emma looked up at him, her lips parted in a silent question. She was trembling, and she could feel the tremors running through his body too. The wind howled around them, but in the circle of his arms, the world narrowed down to the beat of his heart and the heat of his palms. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to run. He lowered his head until his forehead rested against hers. "Tell me to stop," he breathed, his voice ragged. "Tell me to stop, and I will walk away. I will let you go, Emma. But you have to tell me." Emma closed her eyes. She knew she should say it. She knew she should push him away and run back to her safe, invisible life. But the pull was too strong. The gravity of him was inescapable. She didn't speak. Instead, her fingers curled into the crisp fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. Luca let out a low groan, a sound of surrender, and closed the final inch between them. The kiss was slow at first, almost hesitant. It was a testing of waters, a question asked and answered. His lips were warm and firm, moving against hers with a tenderness that made her knees buckle. But then, Emma opened to him, and the dam broke. The kiss deepened instantly, turning urgent and consuming. It wasn't a kiss of discovery. It was a kiss of reclamation. It was 5 years of silence being filled with sound. 5 years of cold being flooded with fire. Familiarity surged back as if no time had passed at all. She knew the taste of him. She knew the way his head tilted, the way his hand tangled in the hair at the nape of her neck. Luca walked her backward, their lips never breaking contact. They stumbled from the balcony into the living room, Emma's back brushing against the edge of the leather couch. He pressed into her, his body hard and solid, surrounding her. His hands dropped to her waist, tracing the curve of her body through her clothes, possessive and desperate. Emma gasped into his mouth, her hands sliding up his chest to wrap around his neck. She felt alive for the first time since she had boarded that bus 5 years ago. This was right. This was where she belonged. But then, reality crashed back in. His hand slid lower, pulling her hips flush against his, and the gun holstered beneath his arm bumped against her ribcage. The sensation was like ice water. The weapon, the danger, the world he lived in, the world that had almost killed him, the world she had run from to save him. Emma tore her mouth away, gasping for air. She shoved against his chest, harder this time. "No!" she cried out, stumbling back. Luca froze, his chest heaving, his eyes black with blown pupils. He reached for her instinctively. "Emma, no!" She backed away until she hit the wall, hugging herself tightly. I can't do this." Luca stood in the center of the room, looking like a man who had just been woken from a dream. His hair was messy from her hands, his lips swollen. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "You felt that. Do not tell me you didn't feel that." "I felt it," Emma sobbed. "Of course I felt it. I never stopped loving you." "Luca, but that doesn't change anything. You are the boss now. You are exactly what your father wanted you to be, and I am just a waitress who can't afford to pay her rent." "I don't care about the money," Luca argued. "I care about the bullets," Emma shouted, pointing at the shattered window of her memory. "People were shooting at us yesterday. Someone wants you dead. If I stay, if I let this happen, I will just be the weakness they use to get to you, just like your father said." Luca's jaw tightened until a muscle feathered in his cheek. He lowered his hand slowly. "So you are going to run again?" he asked quietly. Emma wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I can't stay in your world. Luca, it is too dangerous." She turned to flee to the guest room, unable to look at him any longer. Luca watched her go. He didn't chase her. He didn't try to grab her. He stood in the center of his empty, expensive penthouse, his body still humming with the memory of her touch. He forced himself to step back, to give her the space she demanded. But as she reached the hallway, he spoke one last time. "You can lock your door." "Emma," he said, his voice low and vibrating with absolute certainty. "You can tell yourself this is impossible. But do not think for 1 second that I am letting you walk out of my life again. I lost you once. I will burn this city to the ground before I lose you twice." Emma paused, her hand on the door frame, trembling. She didn't look back. She hurried into the room and shut the door, sliding the lock into place. But she knew, as she slid down to the floor and buried her face in her knees, that a lock would not keep Luca Moretti out. And the terrifying truth was, she wasn't sure she wanted it to. The morning light that filtered into the penthouse was gray and unforgiving. Much like the mood that hung between Emma Lane and Luca Moretti, they had barely spoken since the argument on the balcony, retreating to separate corners of the sprawling apartment like boxers recovering between rounds. The silence was shattered at 10 in the morning by the ringing of Luca's phone. Emma, sitting at the kitchen island nursing a cold cup of coffee, watched as Luca answered. He stood by the window, his back rigid. He listened for less than a minute, his posture shifting from stiff to coiled, radiating a sudden, dangerous energy. "Where?" Luca demanded, his voice dropping to a growl. "How bad?" He listened again, then cursed low and harsh. "Do not move him. If you move him, he bleeds out. I am on my way." Luca hung up and turned. His face was pale, the skin tight over his cheekbones. He looked at Emma, and for the first time since she had returned, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for his men. "I have to go," he said, grabbing his jacket. "What happened?" Emma asked, standing up despite herself. "The Castellanos," Luca replied, checking the clip of his handgun before shoving it into his holster. "They ambushed a collection team near the rail yard. It was a setup. 3 of my men are down. 1 is critical. You need to get them to a hospital," Emma said, her medical training kicking in automatically. "I can't," Luca said, stopping at the door. "If I take them to a hospital, the police get involved. Questions get asked. Arrests happen. And while my men are in custody, the Castellanos will finish the job. You know how this works. Emma..." He looked at her then, a desperate idea forming in his mind. "I need you," he said. Emma froze. No, Luca, I am not getting involved in this. They are kids." "Emma!" Luca shouted, his composure cracking. "The one who is hit bad. He is 19. His name is Leo. You remember Leo? He used to run messages for my father. He's bleeding out on the floor of a warehouse because he took a bullet meant for my capo. I cannot take him to the ER. I need someone who knows how to stitch a wound." Emma shook her head, backing away. "I can't do that. I left this life. If I help you, I am an accomplice. If you don't help..." "He dies," Luca said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "That is the choice. You can stay here and keep your hands clean, or you can come with me and save a life." Emma stared at him. She saw the desperation, the weight of leadership crushing him. She hated him for asking. She hated herself more because she knew she couldn't say no. The warehouse smelled of diesel, dust, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. When Luca parked the car inside the rolling metal doors, Emma's hands were shaking. But the moment she stepped out and saw the scene, the fear evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard focus she had learned during her years as a nursing assistant. 3 men were sitting on crates, nursing minor injuries, but in the center of the room, lying on a makeshift table cleared of tools, was a young man. His face was waxy and pale, beads of sweat standing out on his forehead. A dark stain was spreading across his abdomen. Emma rushed forward, pushing past a hulking guard who tried to stop her. "Move," she ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. She reached the table and looked down. It was Leo. She remembered him as a scrawny kid who used to steal apples from the market. Now he was gasping for air, his eyes rolling back in his head. "I need light," Emma shouted, not looking up. "And I need boiling water, clean towels, and the strongest alcohol you have. Vodka, whiskey, I don't care. Now." Luca stood in the doorway, watching. He saw the hesitation vanish from her. She was no longer the scared girl from the diner or the heartbroken woman on his balcony. She was a force of nature. She barked orders at his toughest enforcers, and they scrambled to obey her without question. For the next 2 hours, the warehouse was silent except for Emma's steady voice and the pained groans of the wounded. "Hold him down," she instructed Luca as she prepared to clean the wound on Leo's side. "This is going to hurt." Luca gripped the boy's shoulders, leaning in close. "Look at me. Leo, you breathe. You hear me? You just breathe." Emma worked with precision. Her hands, which had trembled in the car, were now rock steady. She flushed the wound, her face a mask of concentration. She stitched the torn flesh, her movements efficient and practiced. She checked vitals, adjusted makeshift bandages, and monitored the boy's pulse until it stabilized, when it was finally done. Leo was sleeping, his breathing shallow but regular. Emma stepped back from the table, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist. Her shirt was stained with blood. Her hair had escaped her ponytail and hung in messy strands around her face. She looked exhausted, battered, and utterly beautiful. "He will live," she said, her voice raspy, "but he needs antibiotics and rest. If he gets a fever, you call me." Luca nodded. He signaled to Marco to take over the watch. "Come," Luca said gently. He led her away from the blood and the noise, into a small office at the back of the warehouse. It was quiet there. He pulled out a chair for her, and she collapsed into it, her adrenaline crashing. Luca went to a mini fridge in the corner and pulled out a bottle of water. He cracked the seal and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, and this time, neither of them pulled away. "Thank you," Luca said. He sat on the edge of the desk, facing her. "You saved him." Emma took a long drink, the water cool against her parched throat. She looked at her hands, turning them over to inspect the dark stains on her skin. "I didn't do it for you," she whispered. "I know," Luca said. "That is what makes you better than all of us." They sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't the angry silence of the penthouse. It was a heavy, humming silence filled with shared trauma and relief. Luca watched her, seeing the ghost of the girl who used to patch up his scraped knuckles after street fights, overlaid with the woman who had just commanded a room full of killers. "You can't stay in the city," Luca said suddenly. Emma looked up, her eyes weary. "What?" "The Castellanos are escalating. They hit us in broad daylight. They know I am vulnerable right now. And after today, too many people saw you here, Emma. If word gets out that you patched up my men, you become a target, a leverage point. I have to go to work," Emma argued weakly. "My dad—" "Your dad is coming too," Luca interrupted. "I am moving you. Tonight, where? I have a house, north of the city, by the lake. It is secluded. No one knows about it except me and Marco. It is a fortress, but it is quiet. You will be safe there." Emma wanted to argue. She wanted to scream that she had a life, a job, a plan, but she looked down at the blood on her shirt. She thought of Leo gasping on the table. She thought of her father, defenseless in that apartment. "Okay," she said, the fight draining out of her. "Okay, the house on the lake was nothing like the penthouse. If the penthouse was a display of Luca's power, the lake house was a reflection of his soul, guarded, isolated, but surprisingly human. It was a sprawling structure of stone and timber, hidden at the end of a 3-mile dirt road that wound through dense pine forests. They arrived well after dark. Luca's men had already collected Daniel Lane, settling him into a comfortable downstairs suite with a private nurse that Luca had hired, another expense he waved away when Emma tried to protest. Once her father was settled and sleeping, Emma wandered into the main living area. The house was a study in contradictions. There were high-tech security panels on the walls and a gun cabinet locked with a biometric scanner in the hallway, but the living room was filled with warm, worn furniture. A leather couch, softened by years of use, faced a massive stone fireplace. Emma walked over to the mantel. There were photos there. Not the PR shots she'd seen in the newspapers, but real photos. A woman with laughing eyes and Luca's dark hair, his mother, who had died when he was a boy. And next to it, tucked partially behind a clock, was a small, faded Polaroid. Emma picked it up. Her breath hitched. It was the two of them. They must have been 17. They were sitting on the hood of Luca's first car, a beat-up Chevy. Luca had his arm around her neck, pulling her in for a noogie, and she was laughing, her face scrunching up in pure, unadulterated joy. She hadn't known he kept this. "You found the stash," Luca's voice came from behind her. Emma turned. He was standing in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of wine. He had showered and changed into comfortable clothes, jeans and a dark sweater. He looked younger here, away from the city lights and the suits. "You kept this?" Emma asked, holding up the photo. "I kept everything," Luca said simply. He walked over and handed her a glass. Outside, the wind began to howl. A summer storm was rolling in off the lake, the thunder rumbling low and ominous in the distance. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the house plunged into darkness. "The generator should kick in," Luca said, looking up at the ceiling. It didn't. The house remained dark, lit only by the flash of lightning through the massive windows. Or not. Luca sighed. The storm must have taken out a line down the road. "Stay here. I will find candles." 10 minutes later, the kitchen was bathed in the soft, wavering glow of a dozen candles. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the glass. But inside, the atmosphere had shifted. The darkness made the large house feel intimate, a small bubble of warmth in a chaotic world. They were hungry, having missed dinner during the chaos of the move. "I can make pasta," Emma offered, looking at the gas range. "At least the stove still works. I can help." Luca said. They moved around the kitchen together, a dance they had never actually learned, but somehow knew the steps to. Luca chopped garlic, his sleeves pushed up, the candlelight catching the focus in his eyes. Emma boiled the water, searching the cabinets for sauce. It was domestic, it was simple, and it was heartbreakingly normal. They bumped into each other as they moved, a hip checking a hip, an elbow brushing an arm. Each point of contact sent a jolt through Emma, a reminder of the physical pull that had never faded. They shared small, hesitant smiles, fleeting expressions that acknowledged the absurdity of the situation. Here they were, a mafia boss and the girl who broke his heart, cooking spaghetti by candlelight while a storm tried to tear the world down outside. After they ate, sitting on the floor by the coffee table because it felt too formal to sit at the dining table, they moved to the worn leather couch. Luca brought a heavy wool blanket and draped it over them. The temperature had dropped with the storm, and the house was cooling down. They sat close, their thighs touching under the wool. The rain drummed a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the roof. Luca stretched his arm out along the back of the couch, his fingers just barely brushing the fabric of Emma's shirt at her shoulder. Emma leaned back. She couldn't help it. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically, and the warmth radiating from him was magnetic. She let her head tilt until it rested near his shoulder. She could feel the steady, reassuring thrum of his heartbeat. "It is quiet here," she murmured. "It is the only place I can think," Luca admitted. His voice was low, a rumble in his chest that she felt against her back. "In the city, everyone wants something. My captains want territory. The politicians want bribes. The enemies want my head." He paused, his fingers idly playing with a strand of her hair. "I am surrounded by people all day. Emma, hundreds of them, they obey me, they fear me, but they do not see me. To them, I am just the title. I am just the boss." He turned his head slightly, looking down at her. "You are the only one who ever looked at me and saw Luca." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She turned to face him, pulling her legs up onto the couch so she was fully turned toward him. "I didn't run because I stopped seeing you, Luca," she confessed, her voice shaking. "I ran because I saw you too clearly. I saw the part of you that was capable of terrible violence, but I also saw the part of me that loved it." Luca went still. "What do you mean?" "I loved that you would burn the world down for me," Emma whispered. "It terrified me. I knew that if I stayed, I would let you do it. I would let you become a monster just to keep me safe, and I would love you for it. That is why I left. I was running from myself just as much as I was running from you." The confession hung in the air, raw and honest. Luca stared at her, the candlelight reflecting in his dark eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He understood. He moved his hand from the back of the couch, sliding it slowly along the line of her jaw. His skin was rough, calloused from the gun and the fight, but his touch was incredibly gentle. His thumb traced the curve of her lower lip, dragging it down slightly. Emma closed her eyes, tilting her head into his hand. A shudder ran through her. "Luca." She breathed. He leaned in. There was no hesitation this time. No question of whether he should or shouldn't. He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss on the balcony, which had been full of desperation and anger. This kiss was deep, slow, and devastatingly tender. It was a pouring out of 5 years of loneliness. It tasted of wine and rain and forgiveness. Emma made a sound in her throat, a soft whimper of need. She didn't pull away. She moved closer. She climbed into his lap, straddling him, needing to be as close to him as physically possible. Luca's arms wrapped around her instantly, holding her tight against him, as if he were afraid she might vanish if he let go. One hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss. The other hand roamed over her back, pressing her flush against his chest. Emma's fingers gripped his shoulders, then slid up into his hair, pulling him closer. Their breath mingled, quick and shallow. The heat between them spiked, chasing away the chill of the storm. Emma pulled back just an inch, her forehead resting against his. Her eyes were dark, dilated, searching his face. "I am still scared," she whispered. "I know," Luca murmured, his lips brushing against hers as he spoke. "I have got you. I will not let anything happen to you. Not ever again." He kissed her again, and the world outside ceased to exist. There was no war, no Castellanos, no past regrets. There was only the firelight, the sound of the rain, and the man who had waited 5 years for this moment. His hands moved lower, tracing the curve of her waist, his touch possessing her. Emma arched into him, her body remembering his, their rhythms syncing perfectly. The familiarity was an ache in her chest, a beautiful, painful reminder of what they had lost and what they had just found again. As the candle flickered low, casting long shadows across the room, they sank back against the cushions, wrapped in each other's arms. The storm raged on outside, but inside, in the circle of Luca's embrace. Emma finally stopped running. She let herself fall, knowing that this time he was there to catch her. The morning sun hit the surface of the lake, turning the dark water into a sheet of hammered gold. Inside the master bedroom, the light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long, lazy beams across the tangled sheets. Emma Lane woke slowly, the warmth of the bed seeping into her bones. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot the rundown apartment, the medical bills, and the fear that had become her constant companion. She felt only safety. She shifted slightly and realized why. Luca's arm was draped across her waist, heavy and possessive, anchoring her to the mattress. He was asleep on his stomach, his face turned toward her, the sharp lines of his jaw softened by rest. Emma lay still, barely breathing, watching him, in sleep. He didn't look like the ruthless head of the Moretti crime family. He looked like the boy she had loved when they were 17. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and traced the thick, jagged scar that ran down his forearm. It was an old wound, one he had gotten in a knife fight years ago, but the skin was still raised and white against his tan. He stirred under her touch, his arm tightening instinctively around her before he even opened his eyes. When his lashes finally fluttered up, revealing those intense dark irises, there was no confusion in his gaze. He knew exactly who she was and exactly where she was. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Emma whispered back. Luca shifted, pulling her closer until her back was pressed against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "I could get used to this," he said, his breath warm against her skin. "Waking up with you, not having to wonder where you are." Emma felt a pang of guilt mixed with a surge of hope. She wanted this, too. She wanted it more than she had allowed herself to admit. "Maybe you can," she said softly. They finally dragged themselves out of bed an hour later, the air in the house lighter than it had been the night before. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside scrubbed clean and bright. Breakfast was a quiet, intimate affair. Emma stood at the stove making eggs while Luca sat at the island, drinking coffee and reading a briefing on a tablet. But he wasn't really reading. Every time she moved, his eyes followed her. When she placed the plate in front of him, he caught her hand, bringing her knuckles to his lips. "Thank you," he said. Emma smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached her eyes. She reached out and brushed a crumb from the corner of his lip with her thumb. "You are messy, boss," she teased. Luca chuckled, a low sound that vibrated in the quiet kitchen. He stood up to refill his mug, and as he passed behind her, he paused. His hands settled on her hips, pulling her back against him. He kissed the top of her head, lingering there for a long moment. "We are safe here." "Emma," he said quietly into her hair, "I meant what I said last night. I am not letting you go again. For the first time in 5 years. Emma allowed herself to believe him. She allowed herself to imagine a future where the war with the Castellanos was over, where Luca went, legitimate, where they could just be Emma and Luca. But in Raven Harbor, peace was always a temporary illusion. The spell broke at noon. Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket while she was folding towels in the laundry room. She pulled it out, expecting a check-in from the nurse watching her father downstairs. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered. "Miss Lane." A clipped, authoritative voice spoke on the other end. "This is Special Agent Keller with the FBI. Do not hang up." Emma froze, the towel in her hand dropping to the floor. "How did you get this number?" "We've been tracking Luca Moretti for 2 years, Keller said, his tone devoid of sympathy. "We know you are with him. We know you are at the lake house. And we know about your father's situation." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. "My father has nothing to do with this, doesn't he?" Keller asked. "It would be a shame if the IRS decided to audit Daniel Lane for the tax fraud he committed 12 years ago. The penalties alone would bankrupt him. And given his health, well, prison is not a kind place for a sick old man." Emma gripped the edge of the washing machine, her knuckles white. That was a mistake. He paid the fines. Our records show otherwise. Keller lied smoothly, but these things can be cleared up. "I want to help you. Emma, I want to help your father, but you need to help me first." "What do you want?" she whispered, checking the hallway to make sure Luca wasn't nearby. "Meet me. 1 hour. The coffee shop on 4th and Main. Come alone. If you tell Moretti, or if you don't show, I file the paperwork against your father this afternoon." The line went dead. Emma stood in the laundry room, shaking. She felt the walls closing in. The domestic bliss of the morning dissolved like sugar in hot water, replaced by the cold, hard reality of her position. She was trapped. She found Luca in the living room, cleaning a handgun. The sight of the weapon made her stomach turn. "I need to go into town," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Luca looked up, frowning. "Why?" "I have people who can get whatever you need. My dad needs his specific medication." Emma lied, the falsehood tasting like ash in her mouth. "The pharmacy called. There was an issue with the insurance. I have to sort it out in person. I will send Marco with you," Luca said, setting the gun down. "No," Emma said quickly. "Too quickly." She softened her tone. "Please." "Luca, Marco hates me. He makes me nervous. Just let me take one of the cars. I will be back in 2 hours. I promise." Luca studied her face. He saw the anxiety there, but he mistook it for worry about her father. He stood up and walked over to her, cupping her cheek. "Take the armored sedan," he said, "and keep your phone on. If you are not back in 2 hours, I am sending the cavalry. Thank you." She breathed, leaning into his touch for one desperate second before pulling away. The coffee shop on 4th and Main was crowded, filled with the lunchtime rush of office workers and tourists. Emma spotted Agent Keller immediately. He was sitting in a corner booth, wearing a cheap gray suit and looking entirely too smug. Emma slid into the seat across from him, keeping her sunglasses on. "You have 5 minutes," she hissed. Keller smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "Nice to see you, too. Miss Lane, you look good. Life with a mobster must treat you well. Leave my father out of this," Emma said. "What do you want?" Keller reached into his pocket and slid a small, black device across the table. It looked like a flash drive. Innocuous and tiny. I want you to wear this, he said. Emma stared at the device as if it were a poisonous snake. A wire? A recording device, Keller corrected. High fidelity. Long battery life. I just need one conversation. Emma, get him talking about the Castellano shipment coming in next week. Get him to admit he ordered the hit on the warehouse. Just one sentence that ties him to the violence. I can't do that, Emma said, shaking her head. You can, and you will, Keller said, leaning forward. Look at the facts. Emma, Moretti is losing control. The war is spilling into the streets. Innocent people are going to get hurt. If you help us take him down, we can minimize the damage. He is not a monster, Emma defended, her voice rising. He is a crime boss, Keller snapped, and you are an accessory. But if you help us, I can guarantee immunity for you, and I can make sure your father's debt and his legal troubles vanish. You can be free. Emma, you can take your dad and start over somewhere safe. Emma looked at the device. It was a ticket out. It was a guarantee of safety for her father, but the price was Luca. The price was betraying the man who had looked at her that morning with such open, unguarded love. I won't do it, she said, pushing the device back toward him. Keller didn't blink. He just looked at her with pity. You are making a mistake. Think about your father. Think about the bills piling up. Think about what happens when the Castellanos decide the best way to hurt Luca is to put a bullet in you. I am not taking the wire, Emma said firmly. Standing up. Do whatever you want to me, Agent Keller, but if you touch my father, I will go to the press. I will tell them you are blackmailing a dying man. She turned and walked out of the coffee shop, her heart pounding in her throat. She had stood her ground. She had chosen Luca, but she didn't know that she had already lost, back at the lakeside house. Marco Bellini sat in the security room, watching a grainy video feed on his laptop. He had tapped the city's traffic cameras. He had tracked Emma's car not to a pharmacy, but to 4th and Main. And now, he was watching footage from inside the coffee shop, hacked from their security system. He watched Emma sit down with Agent Keller. He watched them talk. He couldn't hear the audio, but he didn't need to. He saw the federal agent. He saw the woman his boss was obsessed with, and he saw the betrayal. She's a rat, Marco muttered to himself. His suspicion vindicated. I knew it. He didn't see Emma refuse the device. He didn't see her push it back. He only saw the meeting. And in Marco's world, a meeting with the feds meant only one thing. He stood up, his face set in a grim line. Luca was blind when it came to her. He wouldn't believe the video alone. He would make excuses for her. Marco needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. He walked out of the security room and headed up the stairs. Emma was still out. Her room was empty. Marco slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He moved to the closet where Emma had left her overnight bag. He unzipped the side pocket from his own jacket. He pulled out a small, high-tech listening device and a burner phone, standard issue for their own operations, but damning if found in her possession. He tucked them deep into the lining of her bag. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a text to Luca. Check her bag when she gets back. We have a leak. The drive back to the lake house felt like a funeral procession. Emma gripped the steering wheel, her hands slick with sweat. She was terrified. Keller had threatened her father. She had to tell Luca. She had to tell him that the FBI was squeezing her. But if she told him, what would he do? He would go to war with the FBI. He would kill Keller, and that would bring the entire weight of the federal government down on his head. He would be destroyed, and it would be her fault. She pulled into the driveway, her mind racing. She decided she would keep it a secret, just for a little while. She would figure out a way to handle Keller on her own without involving Luca. She walked into the house, trying to compose her face. Luca was waiting in the living room. The atmosphere in the room hit her the moment she stepped through the door. The warmth from the morning was gone, replaced by a glacial chill. Luca was standing by the fireplace, his back to her. Marco was standing by the window, his arms crossed, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. "Hey," Emma said, her voice wavering. "I'm back." Luca turned slowly. His face was a mask of stone. There was no love in his eyes now, only a dark, terrifying void. "Did you get the medication?" he asked. His voice was calm. Too calm. Emma swallowed. "Yes, the pharmacy was busy. It took longer than I thought." "You are lying," Luca said. Emma froze. "What?" "Marco told me you didn't go to the pharmacy," Luca said, taking a step toward her. "He said you went to 4th and Main. Who did you meet? Emma?" Emma's heart stopped. She looked at Marco, then back at Luca. I ran into a friend. From high school." "Another friend?" Luca asked, his voice rising slightly. "First the friend you stayed with the night of the shooting. Now another friend. You have a lot of friends for someone who has been gone for 5 years. "Luca, please," Emma said, taking a step back. "You are scaring me. You should be scared." Marco interjected from the corner. "Tell him who you met." "Emma, tell him about the Fed," Emma gasped. She looked at Luca, expecting him to defend her, but his expression remained hard. "Is it true?" Luca asked. "Did you meet with a federal agent?" Emma's silence was answer enough. "Why?" Luca asked, the pain finally breaking through the anger in his voice. "Why?" "Emma, I brought you here to keep you safe. I opened my home to you. I trusted you. He threatened my father," Emma cried, tears spilling over. "He said he would put him in jail for tax fraud if I didn't talk to him. So you talked to him," Luca said. "And what did you give him? Did you tell him about the warehouse? Did you tell him about my men?" "No," Emma sobbed. "I didn't tell him anything. I refused. Luca, I swear, check her bag," Luca said to Marco, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. "No. Luca, you don't have to do this," Emma pleaded as Marco grabbed her purse from her shoulder. "I am telling you the truth." Marco upended the bag onto the coffee table. Her wallet, keys, and lipstick clattered onto the wood. And then, with a heavy thud, the burner phone and the small black wire fell out. The room went silent. Emma stared at the objects in horror. Those aren't mine. I have never seen those before." Marco picked up the wire, holding it up for Luca to see. Standard issue Fed Tech, Boss, and a burner to call it in. Luca looked at the device, then at Emma. The betrayal in his eyes was so profound, it looked like a physical wound. He looked like a man who had just watched his world end. "Luca." "No," Emma begged, stepping toward him. "I didn't take it. He tried to give it to me, but I refused. Marco must have—" "Do not," Luca roared, the sound echoing off the walls. "Do not lie to me again." He grabbed a vase from the mantel and threw it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, the sound like a gunshot. Emma flinched, covering her head. "I was an idiot," Luca said, his voice shaking with rage. "I was an idiot to think you came back for me. You didn't come back because you loved me. You came back to finish what you started 5 years ago. You came back to destroy me. I love you," Emma screamed. "I love you. Luca, I am being framed. Get her out," Luca said, turning his back on her. He couldn't look at her. If he looked at her, he might kill her. Or worse, he might forgive her. "What?" Emma whispered. "Take her back to the city." Luca ordered Marco. "Take her and her father back to that rat-hole apartment." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope of cash. He threw it at her feet. "There." He spat. "That is what you wanted, isn't it? Money for your father? Take it. It is 30,000. That should cover the hospital bills." "Luca, please," Emma sobbed, falling to her knees to try and catch his hand. "Don't do this. Listen to me. Don't touch me." Luca recoiled from her touch as if she were acid. He looked down at her, his eyes cold and dead. "You are lucky I remember who we used to be, Emma. Because if you were anyone else, you wouldn't be leaving this house alive." He looked at Marco. "Get them out of here, now. And if I ever see her again—" He didn't finish the threat. He didn't have to. Marco grabbed Emma by the arm, hauling her to her feet. "Let's go," he growled. Emma fought him, reaching for Luca, but it was useless. Luca stood like a statue, staring into the fire, refusing to acknowledge her existence. "Luca," she screamed as Marco dragged her toward the door. "I didn't do it. I love you." The door slammed shut, cutting off her pleas. Luca stood alone in the silence of the living room. The fire crackled in the grate. The sun was still shining outside, mocking him with its brightness. He looked down at the spot where she had been kneeling. He looked at the scattered contents of her purse. He fell to his knees, a guttural roar of pain tearing from his throat. He put his head in his hands and wept. A broken man in a golden cage, convinced that the only woman he had ever loved had just sold him out for a cleared tax bill. The ride back to the city was a blur of tears and silence. Emma held her father's hand in the back of the black SUV. Daniel was confused, asking why they were leaving so suddenly, but Emma couldn't speak. She could only cry. When the car pulled up to their curb, Marco got out and dumped their bags on the sidewalk. He tossed the envelope of cash onto the pavement. "Stay away from him," Marco warned, his eyes dark. "If you come near the boss again, I will handle it personally." He got back in the car and sped away, leaving Emma standing in the exhaust fumes. She looked up at their gray, peeling apartment building. She looked at the money on the ground. She felt hollowed out. 5 years ago, she had left Luca to save him. It had hurt, but she had known it was the right thing to do. She had left with her integrity intact. This time was different. This time, she had stayed. She had fought for him. She had opened her heart and let herself believe in a future. And he had looked at her with hatred. He had believed the worst of her without a second thought. Leaving him the first time had broken her heart. But as she picked up the envelope, her hands shaking, Emma realized that being thrown away by him destroyed her soul. She helped her father up the stairs, the weight of the cash heavy in her pocket, and knew that the pain of this moment would outlast any physical wound she could ever sustain. She was back where she started, but this time, there was no hope of return. The bridge wasn't just burned, it was incinerated. Time did not heal wounds in Raven Harbor. It simply covered them in grime. For Emma Lane, the days turned into weeks, blurring together in a gray, suffocating loop of shift work, hospital bills, and lonely nights. It had been 5 weeks since Marco had dumped her and her father on the sidewalk in front of their apartment building. 5 weeks since she had looked into Luca Moretti's eyes and seen a hatred that chilled her more than the coming winter. She tried to numb herself. She picked up extra shifts at the Harbor Diner, working until her feet were swollen and her hands were raw from bleach and scrubbing pads. She focused entirely on her father, Daniel, ensuring he took his medication, cooking him soft foods he could digest, and pretending that the hollowed-out look in her eyes was just fatigue. But the numbness never fully took hold. Late at night, alone in her tiny bedroom with the radiator clanking in the corner, the memories would come. They were not vague, distant recollections. They were sharp, visceral assaults on her senses. She would lie in the dark, staring at the peeling paint on the ceiling, and she could feel the ghost of Luca's touch on her skin. She remembered the lake house. She remembered the way the firelight had danced across his face, the rough warmth of his hands, and the desperate, aching tenderness of his kiss. She remembered waking up with his arm heavy across her waist, feeling safe for the first time in years. Emma would press her fingers to her lips, closing her eyes tight, trying to hold on to the sensation. Her body ached with the contrast. The cold emptiness of her bed felt like a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. She had the $30,000 Luca had thrown at her tucked away in a shoebox at the bottom of her closet. Blood money she was too proud to spend, but too terrified to burn. Every time she looked at the closet door, she felt a wave of nausea. He believed she had sold him out. He believed she was a traitor. And that misunderstanding hurt more than if he had simply stopped loving her. Across the city, in the shadowed back rooms of the Onyx Club, Luca Moretti was not numbing himself. He was burning himself alive. The war with the Castellanos had escalated from skirmishes to open brutality. Luca threw himself into the conflict with a terrifying disregard for his own safety. He slept 3 hours a night, usually in his office chair, waking up with a crick in his neck and a foul temper. He led raids personally, standing in the line of fire, almost daring a bullet to find him. His men were terrified of him. Even Marco, who'd been so smug about exposing Emma, now walked on eggshells around his boss. Luca was sharper, crueler, and more efficient than he had ever been. He was winning the war, stripping the Castellanos of territory block by block, but he was losing himself in the process. Sofia Romano, Luca's most trusted lieutenant and the only person in the organization who dared to speak freely to him, watched this descent with growing alarm. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, efficient and lethal, and she knew the difference between a leader who was focused and a leader who was suicidal. "You need to sleep." "Luca," Sofia said one evening, standing in the doorway of his office, "you look like death." "I will sleep when Manuel Castellano is in the ground," Luca replied without looking up from the map spread across his desk. "If you keep going like this, you will be in the ground next to him," Sofia countered, stepping into the room. "You are reckless." "Luca, that raid on the docks last night, you went in without backup. That is not strategy. That is a death wish. Get out, Sofia," Luca growled. Sofia didn't move. She watched him for a moment longer, her gaze softening slightly. "It is her, isn't it?" "The waitress." Luca's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a sudden, dark fury. "Do not speak her name. She got under your skin," Sofia said calmly, undeterred by the threat in his voice. "And now you are trying to bleed her out, but it is not working. You are just bleeding everyone else." "Get out," Luca roared, slamming his fist onto the desk hard enough to make the lamp rattle. Sofia held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once and turned to leave. "Just be careful, boss. Anger is a good fuel, but it burns dirty. Eventually, the engine chokes." When the door clicked shut, the silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. Luca sank back into his leather chair, the anger draining away as quickly as it had come, leaving him exhausted. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the grit of unshaven stubble. He opened the top drawer of his desk. Inside, hidden beneath a stack of ledgers, was the photo. It was the same Polaroid Emma had found at the lake house. He had taken it from the mantel before dragging her out. He pulled it out now, his hand trembling slightly. In the picture, they were smiling. They looked so young, so stupidly, blissfully innocent. He traced the line of Emma's face with his thumb, a mixture of rage and agonizing longing twisting in his gut. "Why?" he whispered to the empty room. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to believe that she was just another person who saw him as a meal ticket or a monster. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her kneeling on the floor of the lake house, sobbing that she loved him. He heard the raw honesty in her voice when she told him about her fear. Could she really be that good of an actress? Or was there a possibility, a small, terrifying possibility, that he had been wrong? While Luca wrestled with his ghosts, the Castellanos were done waiting. They were losing the turf war. Their income streams were drying up, and their soldiers were defecting or ending up in the hospital. Manuel Castellano, a man who lacked Luca's strategic mind but made up for it with sadistic cunning, knew he couldn't win a fair fight. He needed leverage. He needed something that would bring Luca Moretti to his knees, and thanks to his spies on the street, he knew exactly where Luca's armor had cracked. It was a Tuesday night, rainy and cold. Emma clocked out of the diner at 1 a.m. The streets were deserted, the streetlights reflecting in oily puddles on the asphalt. She pulled her coat tight around her neck, head down against the wind. Walking quickly toward the bus stop, she didn't hear the van until it was right beside her. The sliding door whipped open with a metallic screech. Before Emma could turn, strong hands grabbed her by the coat. She opened her mouth to scream, but a gloved hand clamped down hard over her face, smothering the sound. "Don't make a sound," a rough voice hissed in her ear. She kicked out, her boot connecting with something solid, but she was small, and there were two of them. They dragged her off the sidewalk and into the dark maw of the van. The door slammed shut, cutting off the streetlights, the rain, and her freedom. She was thrown to the floor of the vehicle. Someone zip-tied her wrists behind her back before she could scramble away. A heavy sack was pulled over her head, plunging her into total darkness. The van peeled away, tires screeching on the wet pavement, carrying her into the night. Emma didn't know how long they drove. It felt like hours, but it could have been 20 minutes. She lay on the vibrating metal floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She tried to focus on her breathing, tried to remember the self-defense class she had taken years ago, but fear washed it all away. When the van finally stopped, she was hauled out roughly and dragged across gravel. The air smelled of stale water and rust. She was marched into a building, the temperature dropping as they went inside. The hood was ripped off her head. Emma blinked, her eyes adjusting to the harsh glare of a single overhead bulb. She was in a warehouse, not the clean, organized one where she had stitched up Leo, but a filthy, abandoned industrial space. She was shoved into a metal chair, and her ankles were tied to the legs. Sitting on a crate in front of her was Manuel Castellano. He was a thick-set man with pockmarked skin and a smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. He was smoking a cigar, the smoke curling up into the stagnant air. "So," he said, his voice grating like sandpaper, "this is the girl who broke the great Luca Moretti." Emma lifted her chin, refusing to show him the terror that was freezing her blood. "I don't know what you were talking about." "Don't play dumb, sweetheart," Manuel chuckled, standing up and walking around her. "We have been watching. We saw you at the lake house. We saw you get kicked out. It was quite a show." "If you know he kicked me out, then you know I am useless to you," Emma said, her voice shaking but defiant. "He hates me. He won't give you anything for me." Manuel stopped in front of her, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. He smelled of tobacco and rot. "That is where you are wrong," he whispered. "Luca is emotional. He thinks with his heart, not his head. That is why he is weak. He might hate you, but he still feels for you. And when I send him a video of you screaming, he will come running, and he will walk right into my trap." He stood up and nodded to one of his guards. "Get the camera ready." Emma struggled against her bonds. "You are a coward," she spat. Manuel laughed. "And you are abandoned. Luca let you go, didn't he? He threw you away like garbage. Now he is going to learn what it feels like to lose something he can't buy back with blood." The guard moved closer, checking the camera on a tripod. Emma felt a surge of panic rising in her chest, hot and suffocating. She lashed out, kicking her leg out with all her strength. Her boot connected with the guard's shin with a sickening crack. The guard yelled, stumbling back and dropping the camera. "You little witch!" He lunged at her, backhanding her across the face. The force of the blow snapped her head to the side, and she tasted copper in her mouth. "Enough!" Manuel barked. "Don't damage the merchandise yet. We need her pretty for the first reel." Emma slumped in the chair, her cheek throbbing, her ears ringing. She stared at the dirty concrete floor, fighting back tears. She was alone. She was going to die here. And the last thing Luca had ever said to her was that he hated her. This is the price, she thought. A tear finally escaping and tracking through the dust on her face. This is the price for loving a dangerous man. The news hit the streets of Raven Harbor like a shockwave. Luca was in the middle of a strategy meeting at the club when his phone buzzed. It was a text from a low-level informant near the docks, then another from a contact in the police precinct. They took the girl. Castellano has Lane. The world stopped. For a split second, the noise of the club, the voices of his captains, the clinking of glasses, it all vanished. There was only a ringing silence and the words on the screen. Luca stood up slowly. His face went completely white, draining of all color until he looked like a marble statue. Marco, who was standing near the door, saw the look on his face and took a step forward. "Boss, what is it?" Luca didn't answer. He turned to the wall behind him, plaster covered in expensive velvet wallpaper, and punched it. His fist went through the drywall with a sickening crunch of breaking plaster and bruising knuckles. He pulled his hand back, ignoring the blood dripping from his fingers, and turned to the room. His eyes were wild, terrifying holes of darkness. "They have her," he said, his voice hoarse and deadly calm. "Manuel has Emma." The room went silent. The captains looked at each other, unsure of how to react. They all knew Emma was the traitor. They knew she was the reason for the boss's foul mood. Marco cleared his throat. "Boss, she is a liability. Maybe Maybe this is for the best. If she talks to them like she talked to the feds. Luca moved so fast no one saw it coming. He crossed the room and grabbed Marco by the throat, slamming him against the doorframe. "If you say one more word," Luca hissed, his face inches from Marco's, "I will tear your tongue out. I don't care what she did. I don't care if she sold me to the devil himself. She is mine, and no one touches what is mine." He released Marco, who gasped for air, looking terrified. "Find her," Luca ordered, turning to the room. "Every man on the street, every favor we are owed. Turn this city upside down. If a door is locked, kick it in. If someone knows something and isn't talking, break their fingers until they do. I want her found. Tonight." The men scrambled, sensing the lethal volatility in the air. Within seconds, the room was empty except for Luca and Sophia. Sophia walked over to the sideboard and poured a glass of water. She handed it to Luca. His hand was bleeding, the knuckles split, but he didn't seem to notice. "Luca," she said quietly, "we need to talk. Not now. Sophia, yes, now," she insisted, "before you go burning down the city based on a lie." Luca froze. "What did you say?" Sophia took a deep breath. She knew she was walking a tightrope. One wrong word and his rage would turn on her. "I have been watching Marco," she said, "ever since the lake house. He has been different, smug, too eager to push the narrative that Emma is a rat." Luca narrowed his eyes. "Marco is loyal?" "Marco is jealous," Sophia corrected. "He thinks Emma makes you weak. He thinks she is a distraction, and he was the one who found the wire, wasn't he?" Luca went still. "Yes." "And he found it in her bag?" Sophia continued. "A bag she left unattended in the house while she went out?" Luca's mind raced back to that day, the anger, the shouting, the way Marco had upended the purse with such certainty, the way Emma had looked at him, confused, terrified, begging him to believe her. "I didn't do it. I love you." The memory of her scream hit him like a physical blow. "Are you saying he planted it?" Luca whispered, the horror of the possibility dawning on him. "I am saying it is convenient," Sophia said. "A burner phone and a federal wire? That is sloppy." "Luca, if she was really working with the FBI, would she be that careless? Or would she be smarter? Emma isn't stupid, but Marco. Marco is blunt. He wanted her gone." Luca staggered back, catching himself on the edge of the table. He felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. If Sophia was right, then he had thrown the innocent woman he loved out onto the street. He had left her unprotected. And now, because of his stupidity, because of his lack of trust, she was in the hands of a monster. "God," Luca choked out, burying his hands in his hair. "What have I done?" "You fix it," Sophia said firmly. "You get her back, and then you deal with Marco." Luca straightened up. The despair was still there, but it was being overtaken by a cold, razor-sharp resolve. "I need leverage," he said, his mind working furiously. "Manuel expects me to come in, guns blazing. He will be ready for a war. I need to give him something he doesn't expect." He pulled his phone out. His thumb hovered over a number he had sworn never to call. "Who are you calling?" Sophia asked. "The only person who wants Manuel Castellano as much as I do," Luca said. He dialed. On the third ring, Special Agent Keller answered. "This is a surprise. Moretti, I was expecting a lawyer, not a personal call." "Listen to me, Keller," Luca said, his voice flat. "I am going to make you an offer. One time only. I am listening." "You want the Castellano organization," Luca said. "You want Manuel. You want his distribution network, his ports, his books. I want you too," Keller said. "You can't have me today," Luca said, "but I can give you Manuel. I can give you everything, locations, names, shipment times. I will hand him to you on a silver platter." "And what is the price?" Keller asked, his tone shifting from skeptical to interested. "A ceasefire," Luca said. 48 hours. You pull your surveillance off me. You let me operate freely tonight without interference. And you have a tactical team on standby at a location I will send you. This sounds like you are asking me to help you take out a rival, Keller said. "I am asking you to help me save a hostage," Luca corrected. Manuel took Emma Lane. There was a pause on the line. Keller had met Emma. He knew she had refused the wire. He had a grudging respect for her, even if she was obstructing justice. "She is a civilian," Keller said slowly. "She is innocent," Luca said, his voice breaking slightly. "She had nothing to do with this life. I dragged her back into it. If she dies, Keller, I burn the city down, and you get nothing. But if you help me, you get the biggest bust of your career." The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 48 hours, Keller said finally, "and if you cross me, Moretti, I will come for you with everything I have. Deal," Luca said. He hung up the phone and looked at Sophia. "Get the car," he said. "We are going to war, in the warehouse." Emma was left alone in the dark. Her face throbbed, and her wrists were raw where the zip ties dug into her skin. She shivered, the cold seeping into her bones. She closed her eyes and tried to picture the lake house. She tried to summon the memory of the firelight, the smell of rain, and the feeling of Luca's arms around her. "You came back for me?" she had asked him once in a dream. Always. He had answered. But that was a dream. In reality, he had thrown money at her feet and told her to disappear. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, a prayer to a universe that hadn't listened to her in years. "Please let him know. Please let him come." She didn't know that miles away. A black convoy was tearing through the streets, led by a man who had finally chosen love over power, and who was bringing hell itself to anyone who dared to touch her. The shipping yard on the outskirts of Raven Harbor was a graveyard of rusting steel. Stacks of shipping containers formed a labyrinth of metal canyons, casting long, jagged shadows under the pale moonlight. It was a place where things went to be forgotten, which made it the perfect place for Manuel Castellano to hide his sins. Luca Moretti stood by the hood of his black SUV, the engine ticking as it cooled. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with humidity and the smell of ozone. He was not wearing his usual tailored suit jacket. Instead, he was tightening the straps of a Kevlar vest over a black tactical shirt. Sophia stood next to him, checking the magazine of her sidearm. She looked at him, noting the lethal calm that had settled over his features. It was not the hot, reckless rage of the last few weeks. It was the cold, focused clarity of a man who had nothing left to lose. "We have thermal on the main warehouse," Sophia said, her voice low. 12 heat signatures inside, 2 at the door. Manuel is likely in the back office on the upper level. That is where they will be keeping her. Luca nodded, sliding a knife into his boot. "This ends tonight," he said, "one way or another." He looked at the men gathered around him, 20 of his most loyal soldiers, men who had been with him since the beginning. They were ready to die for him. But tonight, he was asking them to die for a woman they barely knew. "No mistakes," Luca ordered. "We go in hard. We cut the power. We clear the floor. But the back office is mine. If anyone sees Emma, you shield her. You take the bullet. Do you understand?" "Understood, boss," the men chorused in a whisper. Luca looked toward the warehouse, a hulking beast of corrugated metal in the distance. He touched the spot over his heart where the photo of him and Emma usually rested in his pocket. He had left it behind tonight. If he died here, he didn't want blood on her image. "Let's go." Inside the warehouse, Emma Lane was fighting a war of her own. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where the zip ties dug into her skin. She had spent the last hour working them against the sharp edge of the metal chair, ignoring the pain, focusing only on the friction. Manuel had left her alone with 2 guards while he went upstairs to make a call. The warehouse was cavernous and dark, smelling of diesel and rot. She heard it first, a dull thump from outside, like a heavy book dropped on a carpet, then another. The 2 guards by the door straightened up, exchanging confused glances. "What was that?" one asked, before the other could answer. The metal service door exploded inward. The sound was deafening, a concussive blast that rattled Emma's teeth. Flashlights cut through the gloom, blinding and chaotic. Gunfire erupted instantly, the sharp cracks echoing off the metal walls like thunder. Emma threw herself to the floor, dragging the chair with her, curling into a ball as bullets pinged off the concrete and sparked against the steel beams. She heard shouting, screams, and the distinct, terrifying rhythm of automatic fire. It was a bloodbath. He came. She whispered into the dust of the floor, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. He actually came. Terror washed over her, not for herself, but for him. He was walking into a trap. Manuel had men everywhere. Luca was risking his life, his empire, everything. For a woman he believed had betrayed him, the guard who had been watching her, a massive man with a scar across his nose, realized the tide was turning. He didn't run for the fight. He ran for her. "Get up," he roared, grabbing Emma by the hair and hauling her to her feet. She screamed. Stumbling as he dragged her toward the back exit, he cut the zip ties on her legs with a knife, but kept a brutal grip on her arm, using her body as a shield against the chaos erupting at the front of the warehouse. "Move!" he shouted, shoving her toward a dark corridor. Emma stumbled, her legs weak from fear and lack of circulation. She saw the exit sign glowing green ahead. If he got her out, she would disappear forever. She would be a bargaining chip in a war that would never end. "No," she gasped. She planted her feet. As the guard yanked her forward, she used his own momentum against him. She slammed her heel down onto the bridge of his foot with every ounce of strength she possessed. The guard howled in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Emma twisted away, diving behind a stack of wooden crates. "You little," the guard snarled, raising his weapon. He aimed the gun directly at her chest. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the flash. Boom! The shot rang out, but it didn't hit her. The guard jerked backward as if he had been kicked by a mule, a red flower blooming on his chest. He collapsed to the concrete, his gun clattering away. Emma's eyes flew open. Standing at the end of the corridor, framed by smoke and shadows, was Luca. He looked like a demon rising from hell. His face was streaked with soot and blood from a cut on his forehead. His tactical vest was scarred. He was panting, his chest heaving, his eyes wild as he scanned the darkness. He saw her. For a heartbeat, the gunfire, the shouting, and the war faded into silence. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Luca lowered his weapon slightly, his expression shifting from murderous rage to a shock so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. He looked at her as if he were seeing a ghost. "Emma?" he breathed. Emma scrambled to her knees, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "You came back for me," she gasped, her voice breaking on the words. Luca took a step forward, his gaze fierce and unwavering. "I never stopped coming back to you," he answered. Suddenly, a shadow moved on the catwalk above. "Luca!" Emma screamed. He didn't look up. He didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, closing the distance between them in a blur of motion. He threw himself over her, tackling her back down behind the crates, curling his massive body around hers to form a human shield. Bullets rained down around them, chewing up the wood of the crates, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. Emma felt Luca jerk sharply against her, a grunt of pain tearing from his throat. "Luca!" she cried, clutching his tactical vest. "I have got you!" He gritted out, his voice strained. "Stay down." He pulled her tighter against his chest, wrapping one arm around her shoulders to protect her head. With his other hand, he raised his gun over the crate and fired blindly at the catwalk, providing suppression. Emma buried her face in his neck, smelling the cordite, the sweat, and the familiar scent of him. He was warm, he was solid, and he was bleeding. She felt a wet warmth spreading against her side where his torso pressed against hers. "You are hurt," she sobbed. "It is a scratch." Luca lied, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. The gunfire intensified, then abruptly stopped. There was a final shout, a heavy thud, and then silence. "Clear!" Sophia's voice rang out from the main floor. "The building is clear." Luca didn't move immediately. He stayed curled around Emma, his breathing ragged and shallow. "Luca?" Emma whispered, terrified. He pulled back slowly, groaning as he shifted his weight. He looked down at her, his eyes searching her face for injuries. He touched her cheek with a shaking hand, smearing a streak of blood on her skin. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Did they hurt you?" "I am fine." Emma wept, reaching out to cradle his face. "But you are bleeding." Luca looked down at his side. A bullet had found the gap in his vest, tearing a jagged line across his ribs. It was bleeding heavily, staining the black fabric of his shirt. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, his strength finally failing him as the adrenaline crashed. "Luca!" Emma scrambled up, dropping to her knees beside him. She pressed her hands against the wound, trying to staunch the flow. "Help! We need help back here!" Luca grabbed her wrist, stopping her. His grip was weak, but his eyes were intense. "I thought you betrayed me," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. "I didn't," Emma cried, shaking her head. "I never did. I know," he said, leaning his forehead against hers. "I know. I am sorry. Emma, I am so sorry." "Shh. Don't talk," Emma said, tears dripping onto his face. "Just stay with me, please. Luca, don't leave me again." "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured, his eyes fluttering shut. "I am right here." The sterile white light of the hospital room was a jarring contrast to the darkness of the warehouse. The only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor and the soft hum of the ventilation system. Luca lay in the hospital bed, his chest wrapped in thick bandages. He was pale, the dark circles under his eyes standing out starkly against his skin. But he was alive. Emma sat in the plastic chair beside the bed, holding his hand. She hadn't left his side for 12 hours. She had refused to leave even when the nurses tried to kick her out. She was still wearing her dirty clothes, her hair a tangled mess, but she didn't care. Luca stirred, his fingers twitching in hers, his eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light. "Emma," he rasped. "I am here," she said instantly, leaning forward to brush the hair back from his forehead. "I am right here." Luca focused on her face. He squeezed her hand, a weak but reassuring pressure. "Did we get him?" he asked. "Police took Manuel into custody," Emma said softly, "along with most of his crew. It is over, Luca. The war is over." Luca let out a long breath, his head falling back against the pillow. "And Marco?" "Sophia handled it," Emma said, her voice turning harder. "He confessed to planting the wire. He is gone. He won't hurt us again." The door to the room opened, and a man in a suit walked in. It was Agent Keller. He looked tired, carrying a briefcase and a cup of coffee. He stopped at the foot of the bed, looking from Luca to Emma. "You two look like hell," Keller said. "Get out," Luca growled, though the threat lacked its usual bite. "I am afraid I can't do that," Keller said, pulling up a chair. "We have a deal to discuss. You held up your end. Moretti. You gave us Manuel. My team is still cataloging the evidence you sent over. It is enough to put the Castellanos away for life." "And?" Luca asked. "And now comes the hard part," Keller said. "You have a choice. The DA wants a win. Taking down the Castellanos is a huge win. But they also want you." Emma tightened her grip on Luca's hand. "However," Keller continued, looking at Emma, "I told them that without your cooperation, the Castellano case falls apart, and I told them that you were instrumental in saving a civilian hostage." "So what is the offer?" Luca asked. 5 years probation, Keller said, monitored. "You step down from day-to-day operations of the syndicate. You dissolve the illegal arms dealing and the protection rackets. You keep the legitimate businesses, the clubs, the real estate, the shipping logistics. You pay a hefty fine, and you testify against Manuel. And if I refuse, then I arrest you right now for the assault on the warehouse," Keller said simply, "and you go away for 20 years. The room went silent. Luca looked at the ceiling, then he turned his head to look at Emma. It was a crossroads. He had spent his entire life building his power. He was the boss. Walking away meant giving up the identity that had defined him since he was a boy. It meant being vulnerable. But then he looked at Emma. He saw the woman who had stitched up his soldiers, the woman who had fought a guard to get back to him, the woman who was holding his hand as if it were the only anchor in the world. She squeezed his fingers. "I won't ask you to change," Emma whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I learned my lesson. I can't change you, Luca. But I am asking you to choose. Choose what kind of man you want to be. Choose what kind of life you want to have with me." Luca looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the future in her eyes. It wasn't a future of looking over his shoulder or wondering when the next bullet would come. It was a future of peace. He turned back to Keller. "Where do I sign?" Luca asked. 6 weeks later, the autumn air was crisp and smelled of falling leaves. In a modest office building in downtown Raven Harbor, a small crowd had gathered. A sleek silver sign was mounted on the wall behind the reception desk. Moretti Security Solutions. Luca stood by the door, wearing a suit that was tailored but less severe than the ones he used to wear. He looked healthier. The shadows under his eyes were gone, replaced by a new kind of vitality. He was shaking hands with a local business owner, discussing a contract for warehouse security. He wasn't running a criminal empire anymore. He was using his knowledge of the streets to protect the city instead of terrorizing it. It was honest work. It was hard work. And for the first time in his life, he slept through the night. Emma stood across the room, watching him. She held a glass of champagne, her heart swelling with pride. Beside her, Daniel Lane leaned on a cane. He looked better, too. His color had returned, and thanks to the new treatment plan Luca had insisted on paying for, legitimately this time, his cough was almost gone. "He's a good man." "Emma," Daniel said quietly, watching Luca laugh at something one of his new employees said. "I was wrong about him. He had to find his way," Emma said, smiling. "We both did." Luca looked up across the room, his eyes locked onto hers. He excused himself from the conversation and walked over, cutting a path straight to her. He didn't care about the guests. He didn't care about the business. He walked up to her, wrapped an arm around her waist, and pulled her in close. "Ready to go home?" he asked in her ear. "I thought you would never ask," she replied. Their new apartment was nothing like the penthouse. It was a converted loft in a brownstone, with exposed brick walls and big windows that looked out over a park. Not the cold city skyline. It was smaller, cozier. It was filled with books, plants, and the messy, beautiful clutter of a shared life. That night, after dinner, they put a record on the turntable. A slow, soulful jazz track filled the room. Luca pulled Emma up from the couch. "Dance with me," he said. They moved to the center of the living room, pushing the coffee table aside. Luca rested his hands on her hips, his thumbs rubbing soothing circles against the fabric of her dress. Emma looped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. They swayed in the dim light, their bodies moving in a close, familiar rhythm. It was a peace they had fought for, bled for, and nearly died for. "I waited a long time for this," Luca murmured into her hair. "Even when I told myself I was done, even when I tried to hate you, I was always waiting for this moment." Emma pulled back slightly so she could look him in the eye. "I am not running anymore. Luca," she said fiercely, "no matter how hard things get, no matter what happens, I am staying." Luca smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. "I know," he said. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a hungry kiss, or a desperate one. It was deep, tender, and full of promise. It tasted of hope. It was a seal on the pact they had made in the blood and dust of the warehouse. They were two scarred people who had broken each other and put each other back together. They had walked through the fire and come out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. As the music faded into silence, Luca pulled her tighter. Resting his chin on top of her head, they stood there in the quiet of their new life, holding on to the only thing that had ever mattered. They had chosen love, and they would choose it again, every single day, for the rest of their lives. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been an incredible journey bringing Luca and Emma's romance to life for you. I hope you enjoyed the twists, the heartbreak, and finally, their hard-earned happy ending. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. Did you like how Luca and Emma's story ended? What was your favorite scene? Let me know your thoughts in English. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more emotional, intense, and romantic tales coming soon. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next story.